The last light of a Virginia summer burned low over Hargrove Street, painting the quiet suburban road in shades of copper and rust. Sprinklers ticked across lawns. A dog barked twice somewhere down the block, then went silent. Screen doors opened and closed as families settled in for the evening. The smell of someone's barbecue drifted through the warm air, sweet and familiar. The kind of smell that belonged to a life Colt Maddox had never quite lived. He knelt beside his Harley-Davidson in the narrow driveway of the smallest house on the street, his weathered hands working a socket wrench with the steady patience of a man who had learned long ago that machines were more honest than people. The engine had been running rough for 3 days. A small thing to most, but not to Colt. This bike was not just transportation. It was the one constant in a life that had shed almost everything else, the single reliable thing in a world that had proven itself unreliable in almost every other way. He was 45 years old, though the lines on his face told a harder story. His forearms were covered in ink, old tattoos that had blurred at the edges, the way old photographs do, their original sharpness softened by time and sun. A leather vest hung on the porch railing, nearby its back patch, visible from the street, the winged skull of the Hells Angels. 20 years of brotherhood stitched into fabric and worn through seasons, through grief, through the microem and complicated business of becoming the man he was now, instead of the man he might have been. He had ended up on Hargrove Street the way a river ends up in a new channel. Not by plan, but by force. His last place, a rented room above a garage in Southside Richmond, had burned down 14 months ago. He had grabbed the vest, the bike, a duffel bag, and driven until he found a rental he could afford. The house was small, the neighborhood was quiet, the landlord had not asked many questions. Colt had told himself he would stay a few months, get back on his feet, figure out the next move. 14 months later, he was still here. The neighbors had adjusted to him the way people adjust to a scar on a familiar face. At first, there had been sideways glances and short nods. A woman 2 doors down, Eleanor Webb, a gray-haired widow who walked her beagle every evening at 6, had watched him for the first 3 weeks with barely concealed suspicion. Then one Sunday morning, she had appeared at his door with a plate of oatmeal cookies in the expression of a woman who had argued herself into something and was not going to back down from it now. She had handed him the plate, said nothing, and walked away. The following Sunday, she did it again. They had never had a full conversation, but something had been settled between them without words, which was the only kind of settling Colt had ever been good at anyway. The other neighbors had followed her lead. Nobody invited him to block parties. Nobody stopped to chat over the fence. But they left him alone without hostility, and in Colt Maddox's experience, that was more than enough. He tightened a bolt and listened to the engine in his mind running through possibilities, the way a doctor runs through a differential, eliminating options until the right one remained. It was the kind of work he could do without thinking, his hands moving on their own, while the rest of him wandered. And lately his mind wandered to the same place it always went when it had nothing else to hold on to. Danny Voss. They had ridden together for 15 years, side by side on interstates and back roads, through thunderstorms and summer heat, through funerals and celebrations, and the long empty stretches in between. Danny was 2 years younger than Colt, sharper and funnier and faster to laugh, the kind of man who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave it full of people who thought they had known him their whole lives. He had been Colt's balance. When Colt pulled too hard in one direction, Danny had a way of saying something simple, one sentence, sometimes just a look that put everything back in proportion. 20 months ago, Danny's motorcycle had left Highway 29 near the Nelson County line and gone down a wooded embankment in the dark. No witnesses, no skid marks on the pavement, no body ever recovered. The bike had been found at the bottom of a ravine, badly damaged, one wheel still spinning when the first responders arrived. The official report said loss of control. The Hells Angels had held a memorial at the chapter clubhouse. A patch had been retired. Colt had not cried at the memorial. He had stood in the back with his arms crossed and stared at Danny's photograph on the wall and felt something go cold inside him, that had not fully warmed up since. He did not believe it was an accident. He had never believed it. Danny rode like he had been born on two wheels. He knew every mile of that highway. He had ridden it in the rain and the dark in conditions that would have put any other man in a ditch. For Danny Voss to lose control on a dry night in August required an explanation that the official report did not provide. But Colt had no proof. He had questions and instincts and 20 years of experience reading situations that other people missed. That was all. And so he had carried it quietly the way men carry the things they cannot resolve, folded up and stored somewhere deep, where it would not interfere with the work of getting through each day. Almost there, he murmured to the bike, tightening the last bolt. The Harley responded with a solid, satisfying click. He stood up slowly, his knees protesting. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked down the street. The street lights were beginning to flicker on one by one, casting yellow pools across the asphalt. Eleanor Webb was making her evening rounds with the beagle, who stopped to investigate something at the base of a fire hydrant. She waved at Colt without looking up. He raised two fingers off the porch railing in reply. He was reaching for the socket wrench again when he heard it. He stopped. It was faint, barely there beneath the sound of the sprinklers and the distant television through someone's open window. A dull, rhythmic thudding. Not the sound of pipes, not the sound of a settling foundation. Something deliberate, something with intention behind it, a pattern that could only come from a living thing. Colt straightened up and tilted his head the way a man does when he needs his ears to work harder than usual. There it was again, 3 slow beats. A pause, 3 more, drum. He turned slowly, scanning the street, the yards, the houses around him. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. The sound seemed to be coming from the property next door, the house belonging to Wade Hollister. Colt knew Hollister the way you know a shadow. He was there without being present. He left early in the mornings in a silver SUV and came back late, always dressed the same way, pressed khaki pants and a button-down shirt, the kind of man who looked like he taught high school and coached Little League and sat on the board of something charitable. He had introduced himself when Colt first moved in, a firm handshake, an easy smile, a comment about the neighborhood being quiet. That was all. In 14 months, they had exchanged perhaps 20 words total. Colt had no reason to distrust him, but he had no reason to ignore what his ears were telling him either. The thumping came again, weaker now. 3 beats, a pause, 2 beats. He set the wrench down. He crossed his driveway and stood at the property line listening. The sound was coming from somewhere behind the house, low and muffled, like something vibrating up through the earth itself. He called out, keeping his voice low but carrying. Anyone there? Nothing. He stood for another moment. 20 years of riding with the Hells Angels had given him a particular kind of instinct, a radar that ordinary life never develops. It was not fear, it was something older than fear, a reading of a situation before the mind has caught up to what the body already knows. Something was wrong. He walked across the neighbor's lawn without further hesitation, moving around the side of the house toward the backyard. The light was fading fast back here, the tall wooden privacy fence blocking what remained of the evening sun. He pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The backyard was neat and unremarkable. A small concrete patio, a single lawn chair, a few shrubs along the back fence, a garden hose coiled on a hook. Everything in its place, everything ordinary, except for one thing. In the far corner of the yard where the lawn met the back wall of the house, there was a patch of ground that did not match the rest. The grass there was different, newer, less established. It had the faint, slightly raised look of sod that had been laid down over disturbed earth within the last few months. The patch was roughly rectangular, 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, the dimensions of something deliberately hidden. Colt stood over it and listened. The thumping had stopped. He crouched down and pressed his palm flat against the newer grass. The ground beneath felt different, hollow in a way that solid earth is not. He ran his fingers along the edges of the rectangle, pressing into the soil, searching for a seam. His hand caught on something, a ridge of metal just below the dirt line. He dug his fingers in and cleared away the loose soil. Metal, hinged on one side, a handle on the other, mostly buried. He worked faster now, scraping the dirt away with both hands until the outline of a door emerged from the ground. A cellar access door, old iron recently covered over with fresh sod and loose earth, as if someone had decided in a hurry that this door needed to become invisible. And on the exposed side, a padlock, fastened from the outside. Colt sat back on his heels for a moment and looked at the lock. His jaw was tight, his chest was tight. A cellar door locked from the outside had one meaning, and one meaning only, and the meaning of it moved through him like cold water. He reached into his jacket pocket and found his multi-tool. He had carried one every day for 20 years. The habit of a man who spent his life fixing things and had learned that the right small tool at the right moment could change the entire outcome of a situation. He selected the flathead and went to work on the screws holding the hasp in place. They were stiff with rust and dirt, but they gave way one by one, the metal groaning as he turned them. The thumping started again below his hands. Slower now, weaker, the rhythm of something running out of strength. "Hold on," Colt said to the door. "I'm getting there." The last screw came free. The hasp fell away. The padlock clattered uselessly into the dirt. Colt gripped the edge of the door with both hands, took a breath, and pulled. The door was heavier than it looked. It lifted with a grinding sound and fell open against the ground, revealing a rectangular opening of pure darkness. Cold, damp air rose from below, carrying with it a smell that hit Colt in the stomach. Earth, stale air, something sour, enclosed and wrong. The smell of a place that had been sealed away from the world for a long time. He shone his phone light down into the opening. Wooden stairs, 7 of them steep and narrow, descending into shadow. "Is someone down there?" he called. Silence. He put one hand on the wall and started down. The stairs creaked under his weight. He tested each one before putting his full weight on it, the habit of a man who had learned to respect hidden dangers. The light from his phone pushed back the darkness in a narrow cone, revealing bare concrete walls, a dirt-floored alcove to one side, a single unlit bulb hanging from the low ceiling. The air was cold enough that he could feel it through his shirt, colder than the August night, above the cold of underground places that the summer never reaches. At the bottom, he swept the light around the small basement room. Concrete walls, a dirty blanket wadded in one corner, a plastic bucket, an empty water bottle on its side, 3 cardboard boxes stacked against the far wall, a single shelf holding rusted cans, and an old paint container. He thought for a moment that the room was empty, that he had heard wrong or imagined it, that he was going to have to walk back upstairs and figure out how to explain a broken cellar door to a neighbor who had done nothing wrong. Then something moved. In the darkest corner of the room, where the light barely reached, there was a slight shifting, a small adjustment, the deliberate stillness of something that had been trying very hard not to be seen and had now decided, or perhaps run out of the energy required to keep trying. Colt moved the light toward it slowly. A child. A little girl sitting against the wall with her knees pulled up to her chest, her arms wrapped around a stuffed rabbit so worn and compressed by holding that its shape had changed, the softness compressed into something harder and more essential. She wore what had once been a pair of pajamas, pink, with small white stars on them, now gray with grime and too small by at least a year, the cuffs ending above her wrists, the hem riding up above her ankles. Her dark hair hung in tangled ropes around a face that was thin and pale and covered in dirt. She was squinting against the flashlight. Colt immediately dropped the beam so it pointed at the floor between them rather than at her face. He did not move toward her. He did not speak right away. He crouched down to make himself smaller, bringing his large frame as close to her level as he could manage. And he breathed once slowly because everything in him wanted to move fast, and this was exactly the wrong moment to do that. "Hey there," he said. His voice came out quieter than he expected. Softer, like a different version of himself had stepped forward to handle this. The girl stared at him. Her eyes were dark and very still. not the eyes of a frightened animal. Something steadier than that. Something older than a child's eyes should be like a person who has had a long time to think about something and has arrived at conclusions that most people never reach. "My name's Colt," he said. "I heard you knocking." I followed the sound. She did not answer. But she did not press herself harder against the wall either. She stayed where she was, watching him with those still, careful eyes making her assessment. He looked around the room without moving from his crouch. Took in the bucket, the single blanket, the empty bottle, the shelf with its rusted cans. He looked back at her and something tightened in his throat that he did not acknowledge out loud. "That's a good rabbit," he said, nodding at the stuffed animal in her arms. She looked down at it, back at him. "Does he have a name?" A long pause, then her lips moved. He could not hear it. "I'm sorry," he said, a little louder maybe. "Biscuit," she whispered, "Biscuit." Colt nodded like that was the most reasonable name he had ever heard. "That's a real good name. Does Biscuit want to get out of here?" The girl looked at the rabbit in her arms. She thought about it with genuine seriousness, the way children consider things that adults have stopped considering carefully enough. Then she looked back at Colt and gave one small definitive nod. "I thought so," Colt said. "Me too." He reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out the folded bandana he always kept there. Clean dark blue, worn soft from years of use. He held it out toward her, keeping his body still, his movements small and telegraphed. "Here, this is for you and Biscuit both." She looked at the bandana for a long moment. Then she reached out and took it with a hand so small and so cold that the touch of it went straight through him like a current. She shook the bandana open and studied it carefully. Then she folded it into a long strip and tied it around the rabbit's neck like a scarf, her small fingers working with deliberate precision. "There," Colt said. "Biscuit looks good in blue." Something moved at the corners of her mouth, gone before it fully arrived, but it had been there. "What's your name?" he asked. She swallowed. "Gracie," she whispered. "Gracie." He said it back to her like he was confirming something important. "That's a real pretty name." She watched him. Her fingers were still cold. He could tell by the way she held the rabbit, her knuckles pale against the worn fabric. She had been down here in the dark for a long time. He did not yet know how long, but long enough. Long enough that warmth and light were things she would need to be reintroduced to slowly at a pace she could manage. "Would it be okay if we left?" he asked. "Just you and me and Biscuit." Gracie looked at the stairs, at the square of fading evening sky visible through the open door above them. She looked at the rabbit, she looked at Colt, and then she said something that he had not expected. "I've been waiting." 3 words, said in a voice barely above a whisper, but steady, certain. The voice of a child who had made a plan and had possessed the patience to wait for the right moment to execute it. Colt looked at her, waiting for what he asked. "For someone like you," she said. "I heard your bike. It sounds like my daddy's bike." He did not answer right away. He kept his face quiet. But something had shifted in the room, in the air between them, in the weight of the moment pressing down on his chest. He held out his hand. She reached for it without hesitation. Her cold fingers wrapped around 2 of his, and he stood up slowly, lifting her with him, settling her against his side with a gentleness he had not known he was capable of until this moment required it. She weighed almost nothing. She felt like a bird, all hollow bones and careful stillness, her body carrying the lightness of someone who had not been fed enough or held enough for far too long. She did not let go of the rabbit with her other arm. He carried her up the stairs and out into the evening air, and she made a soft sound when the last of the daylight hit her face, half surprise and half something else, something that sounded like remembering what the world felt like. She blinked up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, her eyes wide and undefended for just that one moment. "You're outside now," Colt said quietly. "You're free." Gracie looked at the stars for a long moment. Then she pressed her face against his shoulder, and he stood there in the neighbor's backyard, holding a child he did not yet know, and felt something crack open in his chest that would not close again. He carried her into his house. The small rental on Hargrove Street had never been much to look at from the inside. Bare walls, a worn couch, a coffee table with a ring stain on one corner, a kitchen with mismatched cabinets, and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. No photographs, no decorations. The temporary home of a man who had not yet decided whether any place was worth decorating, who kept his roots shallow on purpose, because shallow roots are easier to pull up when the time comes to move. But it was warm, and it was lit, and there was no padlock on any door. Colt set Gracie on her feet in the living room, and she looked around with the careful attention of someone cataloging a space they want to remember accurately. Her eyes moved from the couch to the kitchen to the front door to the lamp in the corner. She held Biscuit against her chest and stood very still, taking inventory. "The bathroom's there," Colt said, pointing. "You want to clean up a bit?" She nodded. He found a clean towel. He ran warm water in the sink and tested it with the inside of his wrist. A thing he had seen done but never done himself, had never had anyone to do it for. He found a new bar of soap still in its wrapper and set it on the edge of the sink. "Can you manage on your own?" he asked. She nodded again, and he stepped out and pulled the door to. He stood in the hallway listening to the water run, listening to the small sounds of a child washing her hands and face, the splash and the quiet, the particular intimacy of ordinary hygiene after a long time without it. He pressed his back against the wall and looked up at the ceiling and breathed slowly and thought about what he was going to do next. Then he went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. It was not a lot: a half block of cheddar, bread, an apple, butter, 2 eggs. He stared at the contents for a moment, then got out the bread and the cheese and the pan. He made a grilled cheese sandwich with the same focused attention he gave to an engine. Rebuild cutting the bread evenly, getting the butter distributed properly, turning the heat to medium, and watching it carefully. He sliced the apple into clean wedges. He poured a glass of water and then found behind the canned goods a small carton of orange juice he had forgotten about. He shook it, checked the date, and set it on the table. Gracie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had washed her face and hands, and the difference was striking: her skin clean, now pink at the cheekbones, her dark eyes clearer in the kitchen light. She was still wearing the worn, too small pajamas. Her feet were bare, and she stood in the doorway with the careful posture of someone entering the space they have not been given explicit permission to occupy. "Sit down," Colt said, nodding at the kitchen table. "It's all for you." She climbed onto a chair and sat with her feet dangling above the floor and her hands folded in her lap, and waited with a patience that went beyond what children normally possess. When he set the plate in front of her, she looked at it for a moment, then looked at him. "Go ahead," he said. She picked up the sandwich with both hands and took a small bite. Then another. Then she was eating steadily, not frantically, but thoroughly, the way someone eats when they are very hungry, but have learned to manage the hunger rather than be managed by it. She drank the orange juice without stopping. She ate every wedge of apple. When she was done, she folded her hands in her lap again and looked at him. "More," he offered. She shook her head, but then quietly, "Thank you." 2 words, simple as breathing. But the weight behind them, the particular gravity of a child who has learned that food is not guaranteed, and so does not take the presence of it for granted, made Colt look away for a moment at something on the far side of the kitchen that required no looking at. He moved her to the couch and found the cleanest blanket he owned and wrapped it around her. She curled into the corner of the cushions with Biscuit tucked under her chin and looked at him with those steady, too old eyes. "I'm going to stay right here," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "You're safe tonight." She nodded slowly. Her eyes stayed on him for a while, watching him the way animals watch something new. Not afraid, but not yet certain, making their determination. Then her breathing slowed and deepened, and her grip on the rabbit loosened slightly, and she was asleep, and the small house was quiet. And outside on Hargrove Street, the summer night continued without any knowledge of what had changed inside one of its smallest houses. Colt sat in the chair and did not move. He did not sleep. The morning came in through the thin curtains and pale strips. Colt heard the birds first, then the sound of a truck making an early delivery somewhere down the street. He was still in the chair. His back ached. His neck was stiff. He did not particularly care about either. He looked at the couch. Gracie was awake. She was sitting up straight with the blanket folded neatly across her knees, biscuit in her lap. She was looking at him with the same steady attention she had shown from the moment he found her, that quality of watchfulness that seemed to develop for a child her age, like a skill acquired through necessity rather than time. "Morning," Colt said. "Morning," she said back. He got up and went to the kitchen and made scrambled eggs because that was what he had. He made toast. He poured more orange juice. He heard her pat in behind him and climb onto the kitchen chair. They ate in a quiet that did not feel uncomfortable. She watched his hands while he cooked, tracking the movements with genuine interest, like someone learning a language by observation. He put the plate in front of her, and she ate with the same methodical thoroughness as the night before. After a while, she put down her fork and looked at something on the other side of the kitchen. Colt followed her gaze. She was looking at his leather vest hanging on the hook by the back door. He had taken it off the previous night and hung it there without thinking. The back patch was visible. The winged skull, the rocker bars, the chapter name. He watched her face. She was not afraid of it. She was recognizing it. "My daddy had that," she said. "The angel with the wings, exactly like that." Colt set down his coffee. He kept his voice very even. "Your daddy was in the club?" She nodded. "He rode a loud bike, like yours." She paused for a moment, considering. "His name was Danny Voss." The kitchen went very quiet. Colt heard the refrigerator humming. He heard a car pass on the street outside. He heard his own breathing slower than it should have been, deliberate and controlled in the way breathing becomes when the body needs to be managed carefully. He stood up from the table and walked to the back door and opened it and stepped outside onto the small concrete step and stood there in the early morning air with his hands at his sides and the August sky above him, dull and wide and completely indifferent. Danny Voss had a daughter, 7 years old, named Gracie, and she had been locked in a basement 1 house away from where Colt had been sleeping for 14 months. He looked up at the sky. It was the pale blue of early morning, clear and wide, the kind of sky that Danny would have called a good riding day without hesitation. Something moved in Colt's chest, grief and fury and something stranger, something that felt like the answer to a question he had been asking for 20 months without expecting to receive one. "Was that you?" he said to the sky low enough that no one could hear. "Did you lead me here, brother?" The morning held still around him. He went back inside. Gracie was sitting exactly where he had left her, both hands wrapped around her orange juice glass, watching the door he had come back through. There was no anxiety on her face about his return. She had known he would come back. That certainty was something she carried about him already, and he did not yet understand how or why, but he recognized it for what it was. He sat down across from her. "Tell me about your daddy," he said gently. Gracie looked at Biscuit. She straightened the blue bandana around the rabbit's neck with both hands. Then she spoke in the careful, measured way of a child who has spent a great deal of time thinking about what she knows and what it means and how to say it to someone who might be worth saying it to. "He died," she said, "almost 2 years ago. They said his bike crashed on the highway." Colt nodded. "Then Mama died. About 2 months after that, another accident. Wade said it was a car crash. She said the word accident the way a child says a word they have learned to use without fully believing. Wade, Colt repeated, "My stepfather." She said the word without expression as though it were a word in a language she had learned under duress. He moved in after Daddy died. Then he and Mama got married. Then Mama died too. She paused. She looked up at Colt with those dark, steady eyes. "I don't think they were accidents," she said. The words landed like stones dropped into still water, sending out rings in every direction. Colt looked at this child, 7 years old, thin and pale and freshly washed, sitting at his kitchen table holding a worn rabbit and stating what she believed with the directness of someone who had been alone with the truth for a very long time and had finally found someone worth telling it to. He thought about Danny, About the dry night in August and the road Danny had ridden 100 times without incident. He thought about no skid marks on the pavement. He thought about the timing. Danny getting restless in the last months before he died, mentioning just once, that he was thinking about what came next. I want something worth protecting. That was all he had said, nothing more specific than that. He thought about a silver SUV in the driveway next door. He thought about a basement door locked from the outside. He thought about a 7-year-old girl who had been down there in the dark alone, keeping track of days. Why do you think that, he asked. Because Gracie said, and she looked down at Biscuit again, and for the first time something flickered across her face that was closer to a child's fear than the older, steadier things she usually wore, because before Daddy crashed, he was scared. I heard him on the phone one night when he thought I was asleep. He was talking to someone, and he said he knew what they did. He said he was leaving and taking me with him. She looked up. 4 days later, he was gone. Colt sat with that for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. The birds continued outside. The ordinary morning of an ordinary street went on all around them, indifferent to everything being said in this small kitchen. Before that last week, Gracie continued, Daddy gave me his old phone. He said, keep it somewhere safe. Don't show Wade. Don't tell anyone. I was confused then. I was only 5. But I kept it. I put it in my box of art supplies because Wade never looked in there. Colt was very still. When Wade took everything after Daddy died, he took all Daddy's things, she said. But he didn't look in my art supplies. So the phone stayed with me. When Wade put me in the basement the first time I brought my art box, I hid the phone in the wall in a crack where a piece of concrete had come loose. I thought maybe it would matter someday. She looked at him directly. I thought if someone found me, they'd find it too. Colt exhaled slowly. 5 years old, and her father had given her that phone with some instinct about what was coming, some understanding of the danger he was in, and the need to leave something behind. And Gracie had kept it hidden. It preserved it across 18 months in a basement with the deliberate foresight of a child who had understood more than anyone had given her credit for. Your daddy was smart, Colt said, and so are you. She accepted this without false modesty. Then are you going to help me? Yeah, he said. I am. She nodded once with the same finality she gave to everything. Then she picked up her fork and finished the last of her eggs. He needed to take her somewhere safe. He knew that. He also knew how it was going to look and what the next several hours were going to require of him, and he did not flinch from any of it. He had made harder choices in harder circumstances. This one at least was clear. Gracie, he said, I need to take you somewhere today, somewhere safe where people can help make sure you're protected properly. You understand? She looked at him with the careful directness that was already becoming the quality he associated with her most. Will you stay with me? She asked. For as long as they let me, he said. She considered this. Then she nodded and picked up her orange juice again and finished it, and he watched her small hands around the glass and thought about Danny Voss and the 15 years they had ridden side by side, and the daughter Danny had protected so carefully that even his closest brother had not known she existed, and he understood now why Danny had kept her separate from all of it, and he understood that the keeping separate had not been enough, and he felt the weight of that understanding settle into him like something that would not be moving again. They walked out onto Hargrove Street together at 8 in the morning, and within 15 minutes of reaching the nearest police station, everything began to go wrong. It happened the way these things always happen, with the smooth efficiency of a system that has learned to read surfaces rather than interiors. Wade Hollister arrived looking exactly like what he wanted people to see. Pressed khaki pants, blue button-down shirt, the color perfectly even. The expression of a worried father, composed and reasonable, and quietly devastated in the way that men who have rehearsed devastation can look devastated without feeling it. He shook hands with the desk officer.
Somewhere safe.
He nodded at Detective Greer, a compact man in his 40s with watchful eyes and the patient manner of someone who had learned to make his conclusions quickly with
These
the easy
symbols match the
familiarity of a
case
man who had nothing
files.
to hide and knew it.
And this
He
one
looked at
here
Colt
is
with something
new.
that managed to be both
It looks like a
concerned and
warning.
dismissive. At the
Let's
same
move.
time, the look of a person who
I
has
love you
already decided
so
what kind of
much,
man he is
kiddo.
looking at.
I love
Thank
you
God, he
too,
said when he saw
Daddy.
Gracie. Gracie,
Sweet
sweetheart,
dreams,
we've
my
been looking
angel.
for you all night. Gracie did not run to him. She moved sideways closer to Colt until her shoulder was pressing against his arm with a pressure that was small but entirely deliberate. "Stay where you are," Colt said. Wade's expression did not change. He spread his hands in a gesture of helpless bewilderment and addressed the room more than Colt. "She has a history of hiding. She gets confused sometimes. It's been a difficult 2 years for both of us." Detective Greer was making his assessment with practiced speed. He looked at Wade, he looked at Colt, he looked at the leather vest and the tattoos and the 20 years of Hell's Angels membership visible in the way Colt held himself. And the conclusion forming on his face was visible before he had said a single word. Sir Greer said to Colt, "I'm going to need you to step away from the child." "No," said Gracie. Her voice was small and clear and carried the kind of certainty that cuts through ambient noise. One word, but she said it the way a door closes final and without apology. Colt stood his ground. What followed was the bureaucratic machinery of a system making the wrong decision with complete procedural correctness. Wade had papers. He had documentation. He had a letter from a therapist, one Dr. Nolan Fitch, describing Gracie's behavioral history in language that was precise and clinical and entirely convincing to anyone who did not know it had been manufactured by someone who understood exactly how to manufacture it. He had the manner of a man who was known and trusted in this community because he was that man to everyone who had only ever seen him from the outside. Colt had a record: 3 arrests spread across his 20s, a Hell's Angels membership, an appearance that told a story before he opened his mouth. The math was not complicated. He was taken to an interview room. Gracie was taken to Child Protective Services. They moved her past him in the hallway, and she looked at him through the glass of the door as they took her away, and what he saw on her face stopped him. She was not collapsing. She was not reaching for him. She was looking at him with those dark, steady eyes, and she gave him one small, deliberate nod, as if she was telling him something across the glass, as if she was saying, "I know you won't stop. This is not the end. Keep going." He held her gaze through the glass. He gave her the same nod back. Then the door closed and she was gone. Detective Greer sat across from him in the interview room and opened a folder and went through it with the unhurried patience of a man who believed he already knew the answer to every question he was about to ask. The prior arrests, the club affiliation, the lack of any legal relationship to Gracie Voss, the fact that Colt had broken a lock and entered private property. What Greer did not say, but what was present in every pause and every carefully worded question, was this: a man like you does not end up in this situation innocently. Colt answered every question. He kept his voice level. He described the basement, the door of the lock. He described the padlock on the outside. He described the bucket in the corner and the empty water bottle and the single dirty blanket and the smell of the place. He described Gracie's condition when he found her, the worn pajamas and the cold hands and the rabbit with its bandana. Greer wrote everything down. His expression gave nothing away. "We'll look into it," he said, and closed the folder. Colt was escorted to the lobby. Wade Hollister was still there, speaking with a social worker named Sylvia Reeves in a low, steady voice, his hands gesturing with the calm authority of a man explaining something that should be obvious to anyone paying attention. He looked up when Colt came in and gave him a long, measured look, and then looked away, as if Colt were a problem that had already been resolved. He was wrong about that. But standing in that lobby, watching the system align itself around the wrong man with the smooth efficiency of a machine that had done this before and would do it again, Colt Maddox felt the specific loneliness of a person fighting a current that no one else can see. He had no blood relation to Gracie. He had no legal standing. He had a criminal record and a motorcycle club membership and an appearance that told a story before he opened his mouth. And the story it told was not the one he needed people to believe right now. What he had was the truth. And a 7-year-old girl who had waited for the sound of his motorcycle in the dark and who had hidden her father's phone in a crack in a concrete wall because she had understood at 5 years old that evidence needed to be preserved. He walked out of the police station into the August heat and stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the squam. He thought about the nod she had given him through the glass. That small, deliberate movement, the certainty in it. "I'm not done," he said to the sky. He got on his bike. He rode. The house felt wrong when he got back. Not wrong in any way he could point to specifically. The door opened the same. The floorboards creaked in the same places. The refrigerator hummed its same off-key note. But the couch had an indentation in the cushion where Gracie had slept, and the blanket was still folded at one end the way she had left it. And the small plastic cup she had used for orange juice sat on the kitchen counter with a faint ring of pulp dried at the bottom. Colt stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at the cup for a long time. He did not wash it. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down and put his hands flat on the surface and looked at the wall. Outside Hargrove Street was going about its business. A lawnmower started up somewhere. A car backed out of a driveway. The ordinary machinery of a Tuesday morning, indifferent to everything that had happened in the last 16 hours. He thought about the way Gracie had said she had been waiting. Not hiding, not surviving, waiting. With the specificity of someone who had made a distinction in her own mind between the two states and understood that they were different. She had been down there in the dark for 18 months, and somewhere along the way she had crossed from one into the other. She had stopped waiting to be found by accident and started waiting for something particular. The sound of a Harley Davidson that reminded her of her father's bike. A specific vibration in the ground above her head that meant a specific kind of person was nearby. And she had knocked, deliberately, rhythmically, at the right moment when the sound of the bike was close enough to hear. A 7-year-old girl had made a plan in the dark, alone, with nothing but a worn stuffed rabbit and a wall to write on, in the absolute unreasonable conviction that someone would come if she signaled correctly. Colt pressed his palms harder against the table until the edges of it cut into his hands. He breathed. He breathed again. He did not move for a long time. Then he reached for his phone. He scrolled through a list of contacts that had not changed much in 10 years. Most of the names were club brothers or mechanics or the occasional bail bondsman. He stopped at a name he had not called since the second year of the Obama administration. Petra Briggs. They had grown up 6 blocks from each other in Roanoke. She had been 2 years ahead of him in school, sharp and fast and unimpressed by things that impress most people. He had run into her at a gas station 7 years ago, both of them stopping on a road trip, and they had talked for 40 minutes leaning against their respective vehicles while the August heat shimmered off the asphalt. She had handed him her card when she left. Attorney at law, family and civil litigation. He had kept the card in his wallet without being able to explain why, the way you keep things whose purpose you do not yet understand. He stared at the name on the screen. Then he pressed call. 3 rings, a pause, then her voice careful and professional. "Petra Briggs, it's Colt Maddox," he said, from Roanoke. A silence that he could not read. Then Colt, "It's been a long time." "I know." He looked at the orange juice cup on the counter. "I need help, legal help. What kind of trouble are you in?" "It's not for me," he told her. He kept it clean and factual, the way he would describe a mechanical problem, starting at the beginning and moving through the parts in order without editorializing. The basement, the padlock, Gracie, Danny Voss, Wade Hollister in his pressed khaki pants in his manufactured paperwork, the interview room, the lobby, the door closing with Gracie on the other side of the glass. He told her about the phone Danny had given Gracie to hide about the crack in the basement wall, about a 5-year-old child who had understood what her father was asking of her and had done it without failing him. Petra listened without interrupting. When he finished, there was a silence on her end that was not empty but thinking. "That's a complicated situation, Colt. I know what it is." You have no legal relationship to this child. I know that too. And your record is going to be an issue in any proceeding. I know about my record. Another pause. Then in a slightly different register, something that was less professional and more like the girl who had grown up 6 blocks from him. Is she okay? No, he said. She's not okay. She's in a child services placement, and the man who locked her in a basement is out there with a set of fake papers telling everyone she has a psychological condition that explains everything he did to her. Petra let out a slow breath. Come to my office tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Bring whatever you have. We'll talk about what's possible. After he hung up, he sat for another minute in the quiet kitchen. Then he got up and put the orange juice cup in the cabinet without washing it. He was not ready to wash it yet. He did not examine this decision. He simply could not do it and did not try. Sylvia Reeves called him at 2 in the afternoon. She had a direct, unhurried manner, the voice of a woman who had seen enough hard cases to stop being surprised by any of them and had chosen, despite the accumulated weight of that, to keep doing the work anyway. She told him that Gracie was in temporary placement, that she was physically stable, that she had eaten lunch and was being seen by the center's medical staff. She asked about me, Colt said. There was a brief pause. She did, yes. She wanted to know when you were coming back. Something tightened in his throat. Tell her I'm coming. Every day. Tell her I said that. Another pause. Then more quietly, I'll tell her. He arrived at the Child Services Center the next morning at 7:45. The building was single-story brick with flower beds along the front walk and a small playground visible on the side. He sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going in, looking at the building and thinking about what it contained and what it required of him. He was aware of how he looked. The vest was at home. He was wearing a plain dark shirt and his cleanest jeans. He had shaved. He had combed his hair. He had done what he could and knew it was not everything, but had come anyway. The receptionist looked up when he came through the door, and he watched the familiar sequence play out on her face, the assessment, the slight recalibration of her expression, the professional courtesy settling back in over whatever her first reaction had been. He gave his name. She checked her computer. You're on the approved visitor list, she said, and he felt something loosen in his chest that had been held tight since the previous morning. Sylvia Reeves came by and shook his hand with the firm, efficient grip of someone with too much to do and the discipline to do all of it. She led him down the hallway to a small visiting room painted a cheerful yellow that worked harder than it needed to. A table, chairs, a shelf of board games with worn corners, a window looking out at the parking lot. He sat and waited, the door open. Gracie stood in the doorway. She was wearing clean clothes, a blue top and dark pants, things that fit better than the worn pajamas she'd had before. Her hair had been brushed and pulled back. She was holding Biscuit with one arm, the blue bandana still tied around the rabbit's neck exactly as she had put it. She looked at him, and then she crossed the room in 4 quick steps and put her arms around his neck and held on, and Colt sat very still with his arms around her and felt the particular weight of a child who has been alone too long, finally letting someone else carry something. I knew you'd come back, she said into his shoulder. I told you I would, he said. She pulled back and looked at him with the serious attention she gave everything. Her eyes moved over his face the way they had when she first recognized the Hell's Angels patch, reading it for information she already suspected was there. Are you going to get me out? She asked. I'm working on it, he said. It's going to take some time. She thought about that. Then she nodded, accepting it the way she accepted things, as a fact to be worked with rather than a disappointment to collapse under. I brought you something, he said. He reached into the bag he had brought and pulled out a stuffed dog, soft brown with floppy ears, bought at the 24-hour store the night before. He had stood in the stuffed animal aisle for longer than he expected, aware that he was a large, tattooed man in a children's race and not particularly caring what anyone thought about it. Thought Biscuit might want a friend, he said. Gracie took the bong and examined it with serious care, turning it over, pressing its ears, making her assessment. Then she held it against her chest alongside the rabbit. "His name is Ranger," she said. Colt nodded. "Good name." They sat across from each other at the small table and he let her lead. She colored for a while and he watched. She chose blue for almost everything, buildings and sky, and the grass and a picture of a park, filling each section with the careful thoroughness she brought to everything. "You like blue," he said. "Blue is safe," she said without looking up. She pressed the crayon against the paper. "Red is when he gets angry." Colt kept his voice neutral. "Red is bad." She nodded. "Red means loud, and then it means the basement." She said it flatly as a matter of established fact. "He used to say it was for my own good, that I needed to learn to be quiet." She looked up at Tuamon. The crayon stopped. "I was good," she said. "I was really, really good. It didn't matter." He held her gaze. He did not look away, and he did not offer the hollow comfort of disagreement, because she did not need disagreement. She needed to be believed without qualification or caveat. "I know," he said. "I know you were." She looked at him for another moment. Then she went back to her coloring. He visited every day after that, sometimes twice if Sylvia Reeves would allow it. He brought books. He brought a small puzzle with large pieces. He brought a box of 64 crayons, every color, and watched her go directly to the blues and the greens and avoid the reds and oranges entirely. And he understood the map she was drawing with her choices. He met with Petra Briggs on the second morning in her office on West Broad Street, a clean, well-organized space that smelled like coffee and paper. She was 50 now, sharper at the edges than he remembered, with reading glasses she took off and put on as she talked, using them as a kind of punctuation. She laid it out for him without softening it. "You have no blood relation, no legal standing, and a record that any opposing attorney will use to paint you as a threat rather than a protector." Wade Hollister, on the other hand, is a licensed school counselor with 15 years of documented service to the community, a clean record, a marriage certificate showing legal guardianship of the child, and a psychological evaluation from a licensed therapist establishing a behavioral history that conveniently explains everything Gracie might say about him. She put her glasses back on and looked at him over them. "That evaluation," she said, "the one from Dr. Nolan Fitch. Tell me everything you remember about it." He told her what Detective Greer had described: the diagnosis, the clinical language, the specific phrasing about self-isolation behaviors and attachment disruption. Petra wrote the name down. She looked at it for a moment with the expression of a person who has found the loose thread and is deciding how hard to pull. "I'll check his credentials," she said. "That's where I'd start." She told him the path forward was narrow, but it existed. Documented evidence of abuse, Gracie's own testimony gathered through a forensic interviewer according to proper protocol, character witnesses who had observed her behavior with Colt, and anything that contradicted the psychological evaluation, because if that evaluation was fraudulent, the entire foundation of Wade's defense became unstable ground. "What do you need me to do?" Colt asked. "Keep visiting," she said. "Keep showing up. Let the caseworker see what I need her to see. And don't do anything that gives anyone a reason to look at you instead of him." He drove home with that last sentence sitting heavy on him. It was 3 nights later that the hardest moment came. He was sitting on his porch in the dark when Mac's truck rolled up to the curb. Mac was 52, built for the specific purpose of making other people feel like they were standing slightly wrong, with a salt and pepper beard and the steady hands of a man who had repaired and broken things in roughly equal measure over the course of a long life. He had been with the chapter longer than anyone else currently writing. Decker and Priest came with him. The 3 of them walked up the driveway with the unhurried deliberateness of men who had somewhere to be, but were not going to be hurried about getting there. They sat on the porch. Mac had brought a bottle. Colt accepted a glass out of courtesy and set it down without drinking from it. "Heard about the girl," Mac said. "Word travels fast," Colt said. "It's a small world." Mac looked at the house next door. "That him?" Colt nodded. Priest, the youngest of the three, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He had a way of being very still before he said something he had been thinking about for a while. We know people in Richmond, Colt, the kind of people who can make a problem stop being a problem without a lot of paperwork involved. Colt said nothing. Decker picked it up. The man's alone over there every night. Doesn't think anyone's watching because nobody's given him a reason to think they need to. Mac looked at Colt steadily. You'd have clean hands for any custody hearing. Nobody'd connect it back, and the problem would be gone. The three of them waited. Colt looked at the bottle on the porch railing. He looked at the house next door, the dark windows and the ordinary siding and the perfectly maintained lawn that concealed what it concealed. He thought about Wade Hollister shaking hands with Detective Greer, about the manufactured paperwork and the confident ease of a man who had been performing respectability for so long he had forgotten it was a performance. He thought about Gracie at the kitchen table saying, "I don't think they were accidents," in the voice of a child who had been alone with that knowledge for 2 years and had finally found someone worth telling. He picked up his glass. He turned it in his hands. Then he put it down without drinking and stood up from the chair and walked to the end of the porch and put both hands on the railing and leaned on it and looked at the street for a moment. Then he turned back. "No," he said. Mac's expression did not change. "No," Colt said again, more quietly. "I'm not doing it that way." Priest sat back. Decker looked at the street. Mac said, "Why?" "Because Danny wanted out." Colt looked up at the dark sky and found the words slowly, like a man reading a map he has not consulted in a long time, relearning the terrain. He was saving money and making plans and protecting that little girl from everything we are, and he gave her his phone to hide and told her to keep it safe, and then he got killed for knowing too much. And if I solve this problem the way we solve problems, I prove that everything Danny was trying to get Gracie away from was the right call. I prove we're exactly what everyone already thinks we are. He looked at Mac. "And I lose her," he said. "I make one move like that and every courtroom and every caseworker and every judge in Virginia looks at me and sees exactly what they're already afraid I am. And Gracie goes back into the system and ends up somewhere I can't reach her. I can't let that happen." The porch was quiet for a moment. Mac looked at him for a long time with the measuring attention of a man who has learned to read people the way other people read weather taking and everything before drawing conclusions. Then he nodded once slowly. Danny would have said the same thing Mac said. "I know," Colt said. Priest raised his glass. "To Danny Voss." "To Danny," the other said. They sat for a while longer in the quiet of the evening, 4 men on a porch on a suburban street, as out of place as furniture arranged in the wrong room, and then Mac and Decker and Priest walked back to the truck and drove away. And Colt was alone again on the porch with the untouched glass in the dark house next door, and the decision he had made settling into him like weight he had chosen to carry. He went inside. He stood at his kitchen table and looked at the photograph he kept there, the one of him and Danny from years back, both of them squinting into the sun with the easy comfort of men who did not need to explain themselves to each other. "I'm doing it your way," he said to the photograph, "whatever that costs." Petra called him 4 days later. He was at the Child Services Center for the morning visit, sitting across from Gracie at the small table while she worked on a drawing. She had started drawing motorcycles recently, 2-wheeled shapes with handlebars in a simplified engine block that she rendered from memory with a precision that was slightly startling in a child her age. He stepped into the hallway to take the call. "I found something," Petra said, and he could hear in her voice the particular tone of an attorney who has located the crack in the foundation and is assessing its depth. Dr. Nolan Fitch, the therapist who signed Gracie's psychological evaluation. "What about him? His license was suspended 11 months ago. He was under investigation for insurance fraud related to falsified patient records. His license was formally revoked 8 months ago. He has not been legally authorized to practice or sign any clinical documentation since then." Colt stood in the hallway with the phone against his ear. "Wade had the evaluation dated 4 months ago," he said. Petra confirmed it. 4 months ago, Nolan Fitch did not have a license to sign anything. Whatever documentation Wade submitted is fraudulent, not questionable, not disputed. Fraudulent. Colt exhaled slowly. I'm taking this to Detective Greer this afternoon, Petra said, and I'm filing a formal complaint with Child Services about the documentation. This removes the single biggest thing Wade had on his side. The psychological evaluation was his armor. Without it, Gracie's testimony stands without expert contradiction. When he went back into the visiting room, Gracie looked up from her drawing and read his face the way she read everything carefully and without rushing. Good news, she asked. Getting there, he said. She considered this. Then she went back to her drawing. She was adding a second person to the motorcycle, now small, and seated behind the larger figure, both of them leaning slightly forward the way riders lean when they are moving and the wind is in their faces. He sat and watched her draw. He thought about what Petra had said. He thought about what still needed to happen. The evidence in the basement, the testimony, the long institutional machinery that moved slowly and required everything to be done in the right order. Then Gracie put down her crayon. She looked at him. She did not say anything for a moment. She had that look on her face that he had come to recognize, the look that meant she had been holding something and had decided it was time to let someone else hold it alongside her. She held up one finger. She pointed it downward toward the floor. She moved it slowly, tracing the air like someone descending a flight of stairs, step by step. Colt watched. She pointed toward the wall, the direction of Hargrove Street, the direction of Wade's house. She looked at him. He leaned forward. The basement, he said quietly. She held his gaze and did not blink. There's something in the basement, he said. Something I need to find. She reached across the table and put her small hand flat on top of his. The gesture was deliberate and precise, not desperate, not a child reaching for comfort, something more specific than comfort. She nodded once. He thought about the basement. He had been down there in the dark with a phone flashlight, focused entirely on the child in the corner, on getting her out safely without frightening her. He had not examined the walls. He had not looked behind the shelving. He had taken in the gross facts of the place, and then he had gotten her out of there, and that had been the right call in that moment. He had not looked for what she had left behind. You put something there, he said, before I found you. Another nod. And more, she pointed to her own hands, made a small scratching motion with one finger. He thought about the phone. She had already told him about the phone hidden in the crack in the wall, but she was pointing at something else now, something she had made herself with her own hands. On the walls, he said. She nodded, and in her eyes was the relief of someone who has carried information for a long time and is finally passing it to the person who can use it. I'll find it, he told her, I promise. Sylvia Reeves authorized the second basement search after Petra's filing, moved through the appropriate channels, and a second warrant was obtained. The paperwork took 36 hours. Colt spent those hours the way he spent all the waiting hours now visiting Gracie, doing the slow and careful work of being someone she could rely on, sitting on the other side of absence with the patience he had learned from 20 years of long roads. The search team was small. Detective Greer, who had the look of a man reassessing a conclusion he had been confident about, a forensic specialist named Tanner Young, and methodical carrying equipment in careful cases. Petra, who had insisted on being present as Colt's legal representative, and whose presence in a room had a way of making people speak more carefully. And Colt, who had the warrant's authorization to accompany as a material witness. Wade Hollister was at the police station for further questioning, a scheduling arrangement that had been made deliberately and with precision. They went through the house in silence. The interior was immaculate in the way that spaces are immaculate when someone needs them to be, every surface clean, every object in its place, a house performing normalcy rather than living it. No drawings on the refrigerator, no shoes kicked off by the door. No evidence anywhere that a child's life had ever been lived here. Tanner photographed every room before they entered it. They went down to the basement. The main area was what Colt had seen before the laundry space and shelving in ordinary basement disorder. The door to the small room at the far end was closed. Greer opened it. The smell came first, closed air and damp concrete and something sour and old that had been sealed in rather than aired out. Tanner turned on his work lights, and the small room filled with a cold white brightness that it had never known. The bucket was still there, the dirty blanket still wadded in the corner, the empty water bottle on its side. Colt moved to the far wall. He looked at the paint. It was beige applied without particular care, the kind of paint that goes on a surface because someone wants to cover it rather than because they care about the result. It was newer than the concrete beneath it. He could see the difference in texture, the way fresh paint sits on old stone differently than paint that has cured for years. He ran his hand along the lower portion of the wall, just above floor level, where a child would be able to reach. His fingertips caught something. Not a crack, not a bubble, a line. Deliberate and repeated, pressed into the paint with something hard and sharp, the kind of mark that cannot be made by accident because it requires intention sustained over time. He looked at Greer. "Over here," he said. Tanner brought a light close. The beam raked across the wall at a low angle, and in that raking light, the surface changed completely. What had looked like a flat painted wall became a topographic map of marks, lines pressed and scratched into the concrete. Through the thin layer of paint, dozens of them arranged in patterns that were not random. The marks were drawings, crude and careful at the same time, the way a child's drawings are always both things simultaneously. A figure with a raised arm and an open hand. A smaller figure beneath it enclosed in a box. A sun in a corner pressed so hard the line went all the way through the paint to bare stone. And scattered through the images, numbers, dates. A child's handwriting, uneven and large and absolutely legible. The early drawings were simpler, lines and shapes figures without much detail. The marks of a child who was drawing before her hands were big enough or strong enough to do more. As the months progressed, recorded in the careful dates scratched beside each composition, the drawings became more specific, more detailed. The raised arm now held something, a shape that Tanner photographed with particular care. The smaller figure showed marks on its back, rendered with the clinical accuracy of a child documenting something she needed to record rather than something she wanted to express. There were words, too, simple ones pressed into the wall with whatever she had been able to find: a pebble, a fragment of concrete, the edges of her own fingernails in the softer sections near the floor. Hungry, cold, mommy gone. The words had been written at different heights over the months. Colt realized looking at them. The earlier ones were lower, closer to the floor, written by someone smaller or sitting down. The later ones were slightly higher, written by a child who had grown even in captivity, who had kept growing despite everything being done to prevent any kind of growth. "Oh my God," Tanner said quietly. Greer crouched down. He spent a long time looking at the dates beside the drawings. His expression was doing a great deal of work to remain professional. Tanner found the shelf unit that could be moved. Behind it, fitted into a gap between the concrete blocks where the mortar had crumbled away, was a cloth bundle, one of Gracie's old socks wrapped around something rectangular. Inside, a phone, an older model with a cracked screen and a battery long dead. Danny's phone. They knew it from the case, a worn leather case with a small Hells Angels logo on the back, the kind of thing the club had sold at their annual rally years ago.
Somewhere safe.
Colt recognized it before Greer had finished photographing it. He stood and looked at it in the evidence bag and thought about Danny handing it to a 5-year-old girl.
Look here.
And saying,
These
"Keep this somewhere
symbols
safe,"
match the
and the
case
5-year-old
files.
girl keeping it through
And this
18
one
months of
here is
darkness
new.
without being asked
It
again.
looks like a warning.
Tanner bagged it for
Let's
forensics. In the far corner
love
of the
you
room,
so
separate from the
much,
rest of the
kiddo.
drawings, Colt
I
found
love
what he had been
you
looking
too,
for without knowing
Daddy.
its exact shape. 2 figures
Sweet
on a
dreams,
motorcycle,
my angel.
large and small, both leaning forward. moving away from the box that appeared in the earlier drawings, moving towards something outside the frame of the image entirely, something that the drawing indicated by empty space rather than mark. Beneath it, pressed deep enough to show white stone through the paint, 2 words: find me. Not help, not please. Find me. Like an instruction sent from the dark to whoever came. Like a child who understood that passive waiting and active signaling were different things and had chosen the latter as far back as she was capable of choosing anything. Colt stood in front of that drawing for a long time. The room had gone very quiet. Outside the house, the ordinary afternoon sounds of Hargrove Street continued without them. A school bus, a doll, someone's lawnmower starting up, all of it completely indifferent to what had just been found in this small room below the ground. "This changes everything," Petra said from behind him. Greer said nothing for a moment. Then he straightened up and looked at Colt, and something had shifted in his expression, the last of the initial conclusion crumbling away. "We'll need to get into that phone," Greer said. "If there's anything on it, we'll have it within 24 hours. What are you expecting to find?" Colt asked. Greer looked at the wall, at the drawing in the corner, at the 2 figures on a motorcycle leaning forward into whatever came next. "I'm expecting," he said carefully, "to find out why Danny Voss's motorcycle left a dry road on a clear night with no skid marks. They left the room as they had found it, except for the bagged evidence and the photographs that would be entered into a record that could not be argued away." Tanner marked the wall as a protected surface. The door was sealed. Colt walked out of that basement and up the stairs and out into the August afternoon and stood on the back lawn of Wade Hollister's house with the sky above him and felt the shape of the next days already forming around him. He drove back to the Child Services Center. Gracie was in the playroom when he arrived. She looked up when Sylvia Reeves opened the door and brought him in. She read his face the way she always did, quickly and completely. "You found it," she said. "I found it," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the same deliberate nod she had given him through the glass door at the police station when they took her away. The nod that said, "I knew you would. I trusted you with this. You did not let me down." She went back to her coloring. He sat across from her and watched her hands move across the paper, choosing blue, always blue, filling in the sky above a house that had 2 windows lit from inside. He sat with her until visiting hours ended and Sylvia Reeves came to walk her back. At the door, Gracie stopped. She turned and looked at him. "Are you coming tomorrow?" she asked. He said, "Every day, until this is done." She held Biscuit tighter for a moment. Then she turned and walked down the hallway with Sylvia Reeves, small and straight-backed and steady, carrying what she carried the way she had always carried it without bending. He watched until she turned the corner. Then he went home to wait for the phone to give up its secrets. The forensics team's work on Danny's phone took 3 more weeks. Colt visited Gracie every day through those weeks. He read to her every evening, sitting beside her on the couch in the visiting room with her leaning against his arm, and Biscuit and Ranger arranged on her other side. She chose the books. She had a preference for stories about animals that were lost and then found, or stories about journeys that ended somewhere warmer and safer than where they had begun. He read them without comment on the pattern because she did not need him to observe it, only to keep reading. She was talking more. Not about the basement directly, but around it, the way people talk around the things they are still integrating, circling back in fragments, a detail mentioned, and then set aside, a question asked and then answered by herself before he could respond. He let her lead. He answered what she asked. He did not push. One evening she asked him, "Did you know my daddy well?" "Real well," he said. 15 years. She thought about this. What was he like? Colt considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He was the kind of man who made you feel like whatever room you were in was the right room to be in, he said. He laughed easy, and he was generous, and he was brave without making a show of it. He loved writing. He was good at fixing things. He was the best man I knew. She was quiet for a moment. "He talked about me," she asked. "He mentioned you," Colt said carefully. "He kept you separate from the life he was living. He was protecting you from it." He paused. But when he mentioned you, his face changed. The way faces change when someone is talking about the thing that matters most to them. Gracie looked at Biscuit. She straightened the blue bandana with both hands. I knew he was scared those last days, she said. I heard him on the phone at night. I didn't understand all of it, but I knew it was about me. You were right to trust what you heard, Colt said. She nodded. Then I hit his phone. After he died and before Wade took everything away. Daddy gave it to me himself before. He said, keep it somewhere safe. Don't show Wade, don't tell anyone. I was little and I was confused, but I kept it. I hid it in my art box because Wade never looked in there. When Wade started putting me in the basement, I brought the art box with me. I put the phone in the wall when I found the loose piece of concrete. She looked at him directly. I thought if someone found me, they'd find it too, she said. I thought Daddy wanted me to keep it because it would matter someday. Colt exhaled slowly. She'd been 5 years old. Her father had given her the phone with some understanding of what was coming, some need to leave something behind, and she had preserved it across 18 months of darkness, with the faithfulness of a person who understood that some things need to be kept even when you do not yet know why. Your daddy was smart, he said, and so are you. She accepted this without false modesty. Then will it help? It already has, he said. The call from Petra came on a Thursday, 3 weeks and 2 days after the arrest. The GPS data and the gas station footage had been submitted to the district attorney. The charges against Wade Hollister had been expanded to include vehicular homicide in the first degree for Danny's death, and were being built toward a second charge related to the death of Gracie's mother, whose car accident 18 months ago was now being reinvestigated. The psychological evaluation documents had been referred to the state attorney general's office. The man who had helped Wade forge the documentation was already cooperating in exchange for a reduced charge. Wade Hollister, Petra said, is not going to see the outside of a courtroom for a very long time. Colt sat at his kitchen table and listened to her lay it out. And the guardianship, he asked. She took a breath. The hearing is set for next Friday, she said. Judge Marlene Holt. She's thorough and she's fair and she's read everything. Sylvia Reeves has filed a report that is, and I'm quoting directly here, among the most clearly supportive placement recommendations she has submitted in 11 years of practice. He said nothing for a moment. Petra said, Colt, I think you should be ready for a good outcome. He looked at the photograph of Danny on the table. I've been ready, he said. The call came at 6:47 in the morning, 3 days before the hearing. Colt was already awake. He had been awake since 4, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching the light change outside the window, the way it does in the last weeks of summer. That particular quality of early morning that feels borrowed, like the season is already practicing its exit while still pretending to stay. He had not slept well since the search of the basement. He had slept in increments, an hour here and 2 hours there, his body cycling through the mechanics of rest without arriving at anything that felt like recovery. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the wall in that basement room, the drawings pressed into concrete by a child's hands, the sun in the corner that never moved, the 2 figures on a motorcycle leaning forward into whatever came next. Find me. He picked up on the first ring. It was Detective Greer. His voice had the flat, careful quality of a man delivering information he has spent time deciding how to say. We got into the phone, Greer said. Colt set down the cold coffee. There were 43 text messages between Danny Voss and Wade Hollister going back 14 months before Danny's death. The early ones were ordinary enough. Logistics about Gracie, pickup times, a school appointment, the kind of text 2 men exchange when they are connected by a child and nothing else and are trying to manage the connection with minimum friction. Then the tone changed. About 4 months before Danny died, something shifted. The messages from Danny became shorter and less frequent. The messages from Wade became longer, more careful, more precise in a way that read, now that the forensics team had them in sequence, like a man slowly tightening something. And then 11 days before Danny's motorcycle left Highway 29, a single message from Danny to Wade. Greer read it to him. "I know what you did to her. I have proof. I'm taking Gracie and we're leaving. Don't try to reach us again." Colt sat very still. Wade had not replied to that message. But the forensics team had pulled the GPS data from Danny's phone recovered from the cloud account the phone had been linked to. And they had cross-referenced it with the location data from Wade Hollister's silver SUV obtained through the vehicle's onboard tracking system as part of the warrant. On the night Danny Voss died, Wade Hollister's SUV had been on Highway 29. Not near it, on it, traveling in the same direction as Danny's motorcycle within a distance that the forensics analyst described as consistent with following rather than coincidence for 11 miles before Danny's bike left the road. Greer paused when he finished saying this. The pause had weight in it. "There's more," he said. Colt waited. A gas station 3 miles from where the accident occurred had a security camera mounted on its exterior, angled toward the road for the purpose of monitoring the pump. The footage from the night of Danny's death had been recorded over multiple times in the years since. Standard practice. But the system had malfunctioned 8 months after the accident, and when the owner had called a technician to repair it, the technician had discovered that the oldest layer of recorded footage had not been properly overwritten due to a storage error. It was degraded, dark, shot at a distance through a camera that had not been designed for the conditions, but it showed the road. And it showed in the grainy, uncertain language of damaged footage a motorcycle passing the station at speed, and behind it, closer than following traffic would normally be a vehicle, a light-colored SUV. "We're filing the expanded charges this morning," Greer said. "Vehicular homicide, evidence of premeditation, child imprisonment, child abuse, falsification of legal documents." He paused. "There may be additional charges related to the death of Gracie's mother. We're still building that case, but the pattern is there." Colt said nothing. "Mr. Maddox," Greer said, and his voice had changed register, the official language set down and something more personal picked up. "I was wrong about you from the beginning of this. I looked at you and I made a call based on what I thought I was seeing, and I was wrong." Colt looked at the photograph of Danny on the table. "You weren't the only one," he said. "No," Greer said. "I wasn't. But I was in a position to do something about it, and I didn't move fast enough. I wanted you to know that I know that." "Find out what happened to her mother," Colt said. "That matters as much as anything." "We will," Greer said. "I promise you we will." After he hung up, Colt sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He thought about Danny Voss at 22, the first time they had ridden together, the way Danny had laughed at something Colt said and slapped the back of his helmet and nearly run them both into a ditch on Route 11. He thought about 15 years of highways and breakdowns and the particular companionship of men who know each other the way only certain kinds of shared experience allows. He thought about Danny in the last year of his life, quieter than usual, carrying something he was working out. "I want something worth protecting." That was all he had said. Just that. He had found it, he had tried to protect it, and he had been killed for the attempt by a man who understood that Danny, knowing what he knew, made him dangerous, and who had solved the problem the way men without conscience solve problems. Colt pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes and sat in the kitchen of the small house on Hargrove Street and let it move through him, all of it, the 20 months of not knowing, and the 14 months of living one house away from the truth, and the weeks since Gracie had said, "I've been waiting," in a voice steady as stone. He did not try to stop it. He let it come, and he let it go, and when it was done, he was still sitting at the table, still in the same chair, still in the same kitchen. The coffee was cold. The morning light had moved across the floor while he wasn't watching. He picked up the photograph. "I know now," he said. "It took me too long, and I'm sorry for that. But I know now, and she's going to be okay. I'm going to make sure she's okay." He set the photograph down. Then he got up, washed his face, and drove to Hargrove Street. He parked across from Wade Hollister's house and waited. The arrest took place at 9:17 in the morning. Detective Greer arrived in an unmarked car with two uniformed officers and a second detective named Valdez, who moved with the unhurried precision of someone who had done this many times and had no interest in making it dramatic. The neighbors began to appear almost immediately the way neighbors do when official vehicles park in a quiet residential street on a Tuesday morning. Front doors opened by degrees. Eleanor Webb came out onto her porch with her coffee cup. The Pattersons from 3 houses down stood at the end of their driveway with expressions that were moving quickly from curiosity towards something else. Colt had brought Gracie, Sylvia Reeves had taken some persuading, and Petra had been involved in the conversation, and ultimately, it had been Gracie herself who settled it. When Sylvia had explained carefully that they were going to arrest Wade and that Colt wanted her to be there if she felt ready, Gracie had looked at Sylvia with the clear directness that was her essential quality and said, "I want to see it." Not "I think I should," not "I'll try." "I want to see it." She sat beside Colt in his truck with Biscuit in her lap and Ranger tucked under her arm, and she watched the front of Wade Hollister's house with an expression that was not excitement or fear or anger. It was readiness, the expression of a person arriving at something they have been moving toward for a long time. The door opened. Wade came out. He was dressed the way he was always dressed, khaki pants, blue button down. His hair neat and his posture straight, and the expression on his face that of a man who expects an explanation and is fully prepared to be reasonable about whatever misunderstanding has brought official vehicles to his home on a Tuesday morning. He was to the end performing. Detective Greer walked up the front path and spoke to him. Colt could not hear the words at this distance, but he watched Wade's face and watched the performance develop cracks. The way ice develops cracks when the temperature finally and irrevocably shifts. The composed expression tightening, the hands closing slightly. Valdez came around the side with the second officer. Wade looked at them. He looked at Greer. He looked down the street and his eyes found the truck and found Colt and found in the passenger seat Gracie. And the performance ended. It did not end gradually. It ended the way structures end when the load-bearing element gives way, everything that had been held up by it coming down in the same moment. The composed face became something else entirely, something that had always been underneath the pressed shirts and the easy smiles and the firm handshakes. He said something. Cole could not hear it, but the shape of it on his face was ugly and specific, the rage of a man who believed he was owed something and was being deprived of it against his will. Valdez and the officer moved to either side. Greer said something else formal and procedural and produced the handcuffs. In the passenger seat, Gracie had not moved. She sat with Biscuit in her lap and her hands folded over the rabbit, and she watched Wade Hollister being handcuffed on his own front porch with the same steadiness she brought to everything. Colt watched her face rather than the arrest. He wanted to know what it cost her, whether it broke something open that had been held shut by necessity. What he saw was not what he expected. Her face was completely still, quiet in a way that was different from the controlled quiet she wore most of the time. This was something resolved, something that had been waiting for its answer for a very long time and had finally received it. Wade was walked to the police vehicle. He was put in the back. The door closed with a sound that was final and ordinary and not nearly dramatic enough for what it meant. Gracie looked at the closed door of the police car for a moment. Then she looked at the house. Then she looked at Colt. "He can't lock me up anymore," she said. "No," Colt said, "he can't." She looked back at the house one more time, at the ordinary siding and the maintained lawn and the flower beds that had seemed so respectable for so long. Then she turned forward, adjusted Biscuit in her lap, and that was all. No tears, no collapse, no dramatic release, just the quiet settledness of a child who had been waiting for this specific thing and now had it and was ready finally to move toward whatever came next. The neighbors on the sidewalk were watching the police car. A few of them looked at the truck. Eleanor Webb was looking at Colt from her porch, and her expression had the particular quality of a person revising something they had believed without examining the slow, uncomfortable work of reassessment. Colt did not hold it against any of them. He started the truck and drove away from Hargrove Street. The weeks that followed moved with the particular rhythm of institutional processes, slow and methodical and demanding of patience, that Colt was learning to possess through practice rather than nature. The forensics team completed their analysis. The district attorney filed the expanded charges. Wade Hollister was held without bail pending trial, the judge at his arraignment citing the GPS evidence in the documented pattern of behavior as sufficient grounds to consider him a danger. Colt visited Gracie every day through all of it. He read to her every evening, sitting beside her on the couch in the visiting room with her leaning against his arm. She chose stories about journeys and returns, about lost things, found about small creatures who survived large dangers and came out the other side, changed but intact. One evening, she asked him something she had been holding for a while. Were you scared when you came down the stairs in the basement? Were you scared of what you might find? He thought about it honestly. He had not been scared of what he might find. He realized he had been scared of something else. I was scared I might not find anything, he said, that there might be no one there, that whatever was down there was just a sound and nothing else. She considered this. But there was someone there, she said. There was, he said. She picked up her crayon. I wasn't scared when you came down, she said. I was ready. He looked at her. He thought about the weeks she had spent listening to his motorcycle, about the plan she had built in the dark, the methodical patience of it, about find me pressed into concrete. I know, he said. I could tell. The courthouse on the morning of the hearing was the kind of building that takes itself seriously. Stone steps, heavy doors, corridors with high ceilings that made every footstep louder than it needed to be. Colt had been in courtrooms before, but always on the wrong side of the situation, always with the sensation of being evaluated by a room that had already drawn its conclusions. This was different. He wore the only button-down shirt he owned, a dark blue one purchased 3 days ago, specifically for this morning. He had his hair combed and his boots clean, and he sat at the table beside Petra with his hands folded and his back straight, and the full weight of everything that had led to this room sitting quiet inside him. Sylvia Reeves testified first. She was precise and factual, and the precision gave her words a weight that a more emotional delivery would not have achieved. She described Gracie's initial state at placement, the controlled stillness, the minimal speech, the way the child had immediately and consistently asked about Colt during the first days. She described the progression of the visits, the incremental opening the first time Gracie had initiated physical contact, the coloring sessions, the reading, the gradual emergence of a child who had been submerged for a long time and was learning cautiously to come back to the surface. She said, in 11 years of this work, I have rarely observed an attachment form with this speed and this solidity. The child does not merely feel safe with Mr. Maddox. She has oriented her understanding of safety around him in a way that is, in my professional assessment, both genuine and stable. Petra presented the home inspection report, the background check, the parenting course completion certificate, the statement from Colt's employer at the Richmond Auto Repair Shop where he had worked for 6 years without incident, the letter from Eleanor Webb, who had surprised Colt entirely by volunteering one without being asked, describing 14 months of quiet, reliable neighboring, and the evening she had watched him carry a small child out of a backyard and into his house, with the gentleness she had written of someone who understood exactly how fragile the thing in his arms was. Judge Marlene Holt was in her 60s, silver-haired with reading glasses. She removed when she wanted to look at the person she was addressing and replaced when she returned to the documents in front of her. She had the manner of someone who had heard many things in this room and had stopped being surprised by any of them without ever having stopped being affected by them. She read for a long time. She looked at Colt over her glasses. Mr. Maddox, she said, you have an unusual history. Yes, ma'am, Colt said. You have also in the past several weeks demonstrated an unusual degree of restraint and judgment in circumstances that would have tested most people considerably. He said nothing. She looked back at the documents. She turned pages. She was quiet for long enough that Petra set her pen down and waited. Then Judge Holt removed her glasses and set them on the papers in front of her. "The child has been through something that most adults would not survive intact," she said. "The fact that she is sitting outside this courtroom right now, coherent and communicative and oriented toward a future, is a function in large part of the consistency and care of one specific individual. The court takes note of that." She paused. "It is the finding of this court that the best interests of Gracie Voss are served by placement with Colt Maddox as her legal guardian. The order is granted with standard monthly check-ins through child services for the first 12 months. She picked up her pen. The gavel came down. Petra put her hand briefly on Colt's arm. He nodded. He stood up. He walked out of the courtroom and into the corridor where Sylvia Reeves was standing with Gracie. Gracie was holding Biscuit with one arm and Ranger with the other, and she was looking at him with those dark, steady eyes. He crossed the corridor and crouched down to her level. The judge said yes, he told her. "You're coming home with me. For good, for as long as you want." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Forever, forever," he said. She thought about that word the way she thought about everything seriously and without hurry, turning it over, checking its weight, making sure it was real before she accepted it. Then she walked the 3 steps to him and put her arms around his neck, and he held her, this child who had knocked on a door in the dark and trusted that the right person would hear it, and felt something in his chest that had been clenched for 20 months. For longer than that, for most of his adult life, if he was being honest about it, finally and completely let go. "Okay," she said into his shoulder. "Okay." They drove back to Hargrove Street in the afternoon. Colt had spent the previous weekend making the small house into something that was no longer temporary. He had painted Gracie's room the particular shade of blue she had shown him in a magazine at the Child Services Center, a soft, clear color that was neither dark nor cold, just steady and sure. He had built a bookshelf from a kit, doing it twice when the first attempt came out slightly unlevel because he was not willing to give her a crooked shelf. He had found a lamp shaped like a crescent moon at a secondhand store, the kind that casts a gentle glow, rather than eliminating the dark entirely, because there was a difference between the two, and it mattered to understand that difference. The bed was real, a proper frame with a headboard, a quilt in blues and greens that the woman at the fabric store had helped him choose when he had stood in front of a wall of options for too long, and she had asked him who it was for. "My daughter," he had said. The first time he had used that word, he had not planned to use it. It had come out with the ease of something that had been true for a while before being spoken aloud. When they walked into the house, Gracie went directly to her room. She stood in the doorway and looked at it for a long moment. The blue walls, the bookshelf with the books they had read together and a few new ones, the moon lamp on the nightstand, the quilt on the properly leveled bed. She walked in slowly. She ran her hand along the edge of the bookshelf. She touched the quilt. She looked at the lamp. Then she turned on the lamp and watched the soft light fill the room from its single crescent source, reaching into every corner without harsh brightness, the kind of light that makes a room feel held rather than exposed. "It's not dark," she said. "No," Colt said from the doorway. "And it won't be." She set Biscuit and Ranger side by side against the pillow with the careful deliberateness she brought to arrangement. She stood back and looked at them. She adjusted Biscuit's blue bandana one final time. She turned and looked at Colt. "Are you my dad now?" she asked. He came into the room and sat on the edge of the bed so he was at her level. He thought about how to say the true thing in a way that honored both the truth and her. "I'm your guardian," he said. "That means I take care of you and protect you and love you, the same way a dad does." He paused. "Your real dad was my best friend, and he was trying to get you somewhere safe before he died. I didn't know about you in time to help him do that, but I know now, and everything he was trying to do for you, I'm going to finish." She looked at him for a long time with those eyes that had always seemed older than the rest of her eyes, that had seen enough to earn their seriousness. "My real dad would be happy," she said. His throat tightened. "Yeah," he said, "I think he would be." She nodded once. Then she looked at Biscuit on the pillow with the expression of someone settling something internally. "Can we have dinner soon?" she asked. "I'm hungry." He laughed. It came out rough and real and surprised him by its own arrival. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, we can." He made spaghetti because it was the one dinner he knew how to make properly, a recipe Mac had taught him years ago that had fed 20 rough men around a long table and could certainly feed one man and one 7-year-old girl without modification. Gracie sat at the kitchen table and watched him cook with the serious attention she gave to things she wanted to learn. She asked questions. "Why do you salt the water? What does al dente mean? How do you know when the sauce is ready?" He answered each one seriously without abbreviating, because her questions deserved real answers, and he had decided a long time ago, without quite knowing when, that he would always answer her questions seriously. He let her tear the bread. He found a candle in the back of a kitchen drawer, half used and slightly bent, and set it in the middle of the table. She looked at it, then at him. "It's a special dinner," he said, "first night." She accepted this and said nothing, but something in her face had softened at the edges in a way that it had not done before, a small and private relaxation that he recognized as the beginning of something she was not yet ready to name. He served the spaghetti and sat across from her, and they were quiet for a moment, with the candle between them and the evening light coming through the kitchen window and the sound of the neighborhood settling into its Tuesday routine, outside sprinklers and dogs and a distant radio. The ordinary sounds of lives being lived. Gracie folded her hands. He understood and bowed his head. She said, "Thank you for this food, and for the blue room, and for finding me." He kept his head down for a moment after she finished. He was not a man who prayed, and he was not sure who or what she was thanking, but the gratitude itself felt true and important, and he held it for a moment before lifting his head. They ate. She twirled her spaghetti with great concentration, occasionally accepting help when a noodle escaped across the plate. She drank her milk. She asked if they could have garlic bread next time, and he said yes and filed it away as a fact about her, something to know, something to remember, one of the first items in a collection that would grow across every meal and every evening and every ordinary day that they were going to have from here. When the plates were mostly clear, she put her fork down and looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Always," he said. "Were you scared?" she asked. "When you came down the stairs, in the basement, were you scared of what you might find?" He thought about it honestly. He had not been scared of what he might find, he realized. He had been scared of something else entirely, a fear that was harder to name but more precise. "I was scared I might not find anything," he said, "that there might be no one there, that whatever was making that sound was just a sound and nothing else." She considered this. "But there was someone there," she said. "There was," he said. She picked up her fork again, then set it down, something more to say. "I wasn't scared when you came down," she said. "I was ready. I heard your bike and I knew. I knew the same way I knew when Daddy was coming home. A bike sounds like a person. It sounds like somebody on their way somewhere." He looked at her across the table in the candlelight. This 7-year-old girl who had survived 18 months in a basement by understanding that silence was surrender and noise was agency, who had scratched her testimony into concrete with her fingernails and preserved her father's phone in a sock in a wall, and knocked 3 beats into the summer evening until the right person heard her. "I heard you," he said. She looked at him. The candlelight moved across her face, and in her dark eyes there was something settling, something that had been in motion for a long time coming finally to rest. "I know," she said. "That's why I knocked." She finished her spaghetti. She drank the last of her milk. She looked at the candle. "It's a good flame," she said. "It's the right size." He looked at the candle. She was right. It was not too large and not too small. It gave off a steady light that reached every corner of the small kitchen without effort, the kind of light that made things visible without making them harsh, the kind that existed at the right scale for the space it was meant to fill. "Yeah," he said, "it is." She yawned. The yawn caught her by surprise, and she pressed her hand over her mouth and looked slightly embarrassed by it, and the embarrassment itself was something new, the self-consciousness of a child who was becoming comfortable enough to be caught off guard. "Bedtime," he said. She did not argue. She helped him carry the plates to the sink, and she brushed her teeth in the small bathroom, while he waited in the hallway, and she changed into the new pajamas that were the right size properly, her size for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, and came out with Biscuit under one arm and Ranger under the other. She climbed into the proper bed with its correctly leveled shelf and its moon lamp casting its soft, steady glow, and she looked up at the ceiling while he pulled the quilt up around her. "Will you stay until I'm asleep?" she asked. He sat in the chair he had moved into the corner for exactly this purpose. "Yes," he said. She arranged Biscuit and Ranger on either side of her with the care of someone establishing an order that mattered. She looked at the moon lamp. She looked at the ceiling. Her breathing began to slow. Just before the edge of sleep, she said very quietly, "Colt." "Yeah," he said. "The motorcycle drawing I made on the wall. The one at the end. That was you. I didn't know your name yet, but I knew someone was coming and I drew it like you." He sat very still in the corner chair. "I know," he said. "I know it was." She closed her eyes. He sat in the chair in the blue room and watched her breathing deepen and her grip on the rabbit loosen and her face go quiet and smooth in the light of the crescent moon lamp. Outside on Hargrove Street, the Tuesday evening continued its ordinary business. A car passing someone's porch light, coming on the last of the summer heat, releasing itself slowly into the cooling night. The neighborhood went about its life as it always did, as it always would, indifferent and ordinary, and completely unaware of what had changed in the smallest house on the street. Colt stayed where he said he would stay. He stayed until her breathing was deep and even, and her hands had gone still on the quilt. He stayed until the lamp's soft light had been burning steadily for long enough that the room had settled into its own warmth, the walls and the shelf and the quilt all contributing to a temperature that was the temperature of safety rather than of cold. Then he stayed a little longer. Through the window, the August sky was the deep, clear blue of late summer, the last blue of the season, before the air would begin its long turn toward autumn, the color that Danny would have called a perfect night, without hesitation, standing beside his bike, with one hand on the tank and looking up with the expression of a man who had learned to appreciate what was above him. Colt looked at it for a while. He thought about all the roads that had led to this room and this chair and this child breathing quietly in the blue light. He thought about a sound from below the earth and a man who stopped to listen when everything in his ordinary evening told him to keep working on his engine and not get involved. He thought about a 7-year-old girl who had been waiting. He reached over and turned off the lamp. The room held its dark easily, the way rooms do when there is nothing in them to fear, when the dark is just the absence of light and not the presence of anything worse. He sat for another moment in the quiet. Then he got up and walked out and left the door open behind him, the way you do when someone small might need to call for you in the night. And he went to the kitchen and washed the spaghetti plates in warm water, with the sound of the water running in the quiet house. And through the window above the sink, the stars were out over Hargrove Street, steady and cold and very far away, and completely indifferent to everything below them. But he was not indifferent. He dried his hands on the kitchen towel and folded it over the handle of the oven door. He turned off the kitchen light. He walked down the hallway and paused for a moment at the open door of the blue room, listening to her breathe. Then he went to bed. And the house was quiet in the way that houses are quiet when they are finally doing what they were built to do, when they are shelter, in fact, rather than just in name, holding the people inside them through the night and waiting with the patient permanence of walls and roofs and doors that open from the inside for the morning to come.